very common, famous stories of the New Testament because we're always surprised at how many people don't know them and don't know some of the lessons that are in it. So today's story is going to come from John 8. And is the offering finished yet? So B, if the offering baskets are done, can you get those things ready? Because I need that. Yeah. Are they ready? Okay, so shh. I need you to pay attention to the instructions. Okay, there's baskets coming right now, and what I need everybody to do is grab one stone out of the basket. Just hold it in your hand while I'm talking, and you'll find out when I'm done why you have that stone in your hand. So are the baskets going with the stones? Okay. If you don't, so just the front rows haven't gotten stones yet? Okay, so keep getting your stones. Parents at the back, I would really encourage you to have the kids doing some quiet activities so you're not distracting the people that are sitting in the back row. We love the kids, but we also want them to know that the word is also to be respected and honored, right? So here we go. John 8. Who knows what that story is? You don't count. Okay. Such a cheater as he watches me do it all week. Anybody else possibly know? Okay, Stuart. The woman caught in adultery. So this story, and the reason why you're getting stones passed out to you is for two things. The name of this message is, have you ever held a stone? Yes, and you're holding one right now, and nobody's allowed to throw it at all. Okay, we're going to have a different purpose for those stones. So who still needs a stone? Okay, Sarah needs a stone, and there's ones back there. Rob, one's back there with their hands up. There we go. There's all my stones. Okay, Alf, you got a stone? Okay. Are you ready? So let's read John 8, verses 1 to something. Jesus walked up to the Mount of Olives near the city where he spent the night. Then at dawn he appeared at the temple courts again, and soon all the people gathered around to listen to his words, so he sat and taught them. Okay, now picture this. He's sitting inside a great crowd of people talking. Now remember, we've already talked last week I taught, and I was talking about the religious ones really hated that these crowds were following him. They really hated that they were coming out to see him. So now, once again, a crowd has followed him, and guess what? They're all sitting, standing, whatever, finding a place to sit, and they're listening to Jesus teach them. But then in the middle of his teaching, it says, the religious scholars and the Pharisees broke through the crowd, and they brought a woman who'd been caught in committing the act of adultery. And they made her stand in the middle of everyone. Now you need to understand this was humiliation at its greatest degree, because it says they caught her in the middle. So I'll just leave that up to your imaginations, or maybe just cleanse your imaginations. But the thing is, they have grabbed her in the middle of a sin, in the middle of adultery. So she probably was happy if somebody gave her a blanket or a robe to wrap around her. And then they pushed her in the middle of a bunch of men. Religious men who feel they're better than anybody else. And then they said to Jesus, "Teacher, we caught this woman in the very act of adultery." So figure that one out. "Doesn't Moses' law command us to stone to death a woman like this? Tell us, what should we do? What should we do with her?" And they were only testing Jesus because they hoped to trap him with his own words and accuse him of breaking the laws of Moses. Now here's another interesting part. But Jesus did not answer them. Instead, he simply bent down and wrote in the dust with his finger. And angry, they kept insisting that he answer their questions. So he stood up and he looked at them and he said, "Okay, let's have the first man who's never had a sinful thought or desire throw the first stone at her." Now, I'll bet you in her head she was going, "What? Like, this is maybe not a good idea." But Jesus knew what he was about to do. And then he bent over and he starts writing more words in the dust. And upon hearing that, her accusers slowly left the crowd, one by one at a time, beginning with the oldest to the youngest, with a convicted conscience. Now, I'm using the Passion Translation on this because I liked that wording. With a convicted conscience. Until Jesus was finally left alone with the woman still standing there in front of him. And so he stood back up and he said to her, "Dear woman, where are your accusers? Is there no one here to condemn you?" And looking around, she replies, "I see no one, Lord." Now, interesting, why do you think they put in that she had to look around? I think that when he said, "Let the first man who's never had a sinful thought throw a stone," I think she closed her eyes and got ready for the blows. I think she closed her eyes and got ready for death. Because he has to say, "Look around." And then she does it. Where'd they all go? They were all here a minute ago and they're all gone. And looking around, she says, "I see no one, Lord." And Jesus says, "Certainly, then I don't condemn you either. So go now, and from now on, be free from a life of sin." So let me tell you, this woman was probably somebody like, could have been your sister, your daughter, an aunt, could it be somebody you know, and she dreams just like every other woman. But something didn't go the way she expected, and we're told in John 8 what went wrong. She's ended up being a woman who's committing adultery. I bet she didn't plan on it as a little girl playing with her dolls. I bet she didn't sit there someday playing games and saying, "Boy, I can't wait till I get to grow up and be an adulteress." You know, it's like saying, "I can't wait to grow up and be a prostitute." Like, nobody plans on being that kind of a sinner. But the only thing we know in this story is now she's in trouble. She's in a lot of trouble, and it's the result of a choice. And it was her choice how to respond to life. And does she feel guilty? We don't know. Does she feel the weight of the sin she's committing? We don't really know that either. We know she's afraid, but we don't know if she's feeling the weight of her sin. Does she hear from God? We don't know. The only thing we know is now she's gotten caught in her sin, and she is being exposed in front of not just the people, but the religious people. The men from her church or the synagogue find out where she is, and they burst in on her while she's in the sin, and they drag her out onto the street. I bet you if she wishes she could die, it would have been right there, because she knows stoning is not a good death. Stoning is a painful death. She knows what's coming, and she knows it's not going to be quick, and it's not going to be merciful. And she realizes as they're pushing and shoving her and spitting on her that she is facing death. And she hears them say then, though, that they're going to take her to this teacher that she's probably or possibly heard about is speaking in the city. And does she have hope that he is going to help her? No, because she knows one thing: the law is against her. She has broken the law, and there is only one answer for the law. And that answer is she must die for her sin. If he shows mercy, if Jesus shows mercy, the religious people are going to use her to bring about his downfall. If he shows mercy, they're going to say he's soft on the law. Plus, if he does say stone her, then all the Roman authorities will be against him, because in those days, Rome had decreed that no Jewish authority could execute anybody. So they've planned a very neat little trap, haven't they? If he saves her, he's in trouble. If he kills her, he's in trouble. Or if he agrees with the killing of her. So there they stand, this interesting group. Just picture it. The woman, trembling with fear. She's filled with guilt and shame. She's wishing she could die. She's believing she's about to. And the men, the ones who have never yet even seen their own sins, but who are really adept at pointing out the sins of others, because these are the religious ones. And isn't that the way when we become religious? And come on, let's admit, we've all been religious at one time or another in our lives. We've all gone through that stage where we like to point out where the other guys are sinning. Everybody has a little bit of that in them. But these guys, this was their life. It was based on pointing out everybody else's sin. So now these holy men who are standing with stones in their hands are just waiting to see who's going to throw the first one. And so while you feel that stone in your hand right now, the question is, have you ever held a stone in your hand? Because in this role, in this story, we're kind of taking the role of spectators. We're looking from the outside. And in some cases, we're actually judging the men from the crowd, and other people might be judging the woman. Yet how many times have we had those same stones in our hands? How do we become stone throwers like they did? Well, let's look at this. See, people can be all around you. They can be trembling like the woman in fear and shame, guilt, but you don't notice them. You become blinded by self-righteousness or pride. We can even get carried away with the business of just taking care of ourselves and our needs, and we become so much like that, we're not moved to take care of the needs of anybody else anymore, because we just got to take care of ourselves. And how do we produce those stone throwers? Well, all of us have at one time or another known a stone thrower or been hit by one. And it comes from judging other people's spirituality or lack of. We can throw stones. You know, someone's kids were a little wild in church on Sunday. Pick up a stone. What kind of parents are they? Someone's marriage isn't working. Pick up another stone. Well, can you blame them? Look at how they live. Or look at what he's like. Look at what she's like. How about the worship leader chose the wrong songs? Or he played too loudly, or he played too soft, or he totally missed what the Holy Spirit was saying. Pick up a few more stones. Get ready. Shouldn't those people clean up their act before they come to church? Oh, pick up another stone. How do we produce those stone throwers? By learning to walk in condemnation and judgment, just like those men did. And parents, we have to be careful of not passing that on to our kids, because if we raise our kids to condemn and judge, it'll eventually come back on us. And sooner or later, those kids that we've taught to judge, they're going to judge us. And those stones will come back on us. We never admit, but sometimes we gather stones because it actually energizes us. See, I think these guys were getting energized because it made them feel better than everybody else. It was part of what being a religious person in those days was all about. You even wore special clothing so that you got recognized on the street as, oh, it's one of them. But there's no room for stone throwers in community. And today we're going to also talk about that maybe there's some stones you need to get rid of. Stones that you've been throwing at a boss or a friend or a spouse, an in-law, a parent, an ex-spouse, an harsh father, a cold mother. But I want to talk about why letting go of stones is so hard. Why is forgiveness so hard? Well, sometimes it's because we've carried those stones for a long time and we can't remember life without them. Just put it down. But you might have to take action. Those men had carried judgment in their hearts for so long, they didn't know what it was to have mercy. Remember, we learned about the Pharisee or Sadducee last week with the daughter that was dying. His robes identified him as one of the righteous, one of these self-righteous, religious ones. And he had no problem throwing himself at Jesus' feet and saying, please, please, my daughter's dying. Come and help me. See, at that moment, all his stones were gone. He didn't care anymore. But I can bet you there was others that picked up stones when they saw him. Why are you bowing down to that Jew guy? The guy who's walking around through the city teaching. He's the one we want to get rid of. Why are you acknowledging him? There's always a reason to pick up a stone. If you've spread gossip, maybe you need to go back and make it right. But don't go back and make it right if they don't know. I'll remember one of my favorite apologies was Alf and I were in the middle of a wonderful prayer meeting. And it was, we hit a forgiveness stage. We were at the Trade X. There was, 10,000 of us. And we just said, this is a time to just release forgiveness. And I thought we were having a beautiful time. Like, yes, Lord, we forgive and we let go. And all of a sudden someone tapped us on the shoulder and said, we just want you to know that we need to ask your forgiveness. And we said, oh, for what? Well, we've been gossiping about you. And we've been telling people all sorts of things about you because we really don't like you very much. Can you forgive us? And Alf and I went, yeah. And then they left, and we both kind of looked at each other and said, do you feel good? Because I don't feel good. And now I'm wondering, how many of these people did they tell those stories to? So when I say go back and make it right, go back and make it right if you know a word has gone back to somebody about what you've said. If your heart has been hard towards somebody, do an act of service for them. You don't have to tell anybody else. God will change your heart. If you behave badly, go to them today and say, I'm sorry. But sometimes stone throwing happens in families, and it may involve only little pebbles at the beginning. But throwers hardly notice it anymore, and they don't realize their stones are getting bigger and bigger. I heard R.T. Kendall preach once in Toronto, and just like this woman, I want you to picture this. He made this amazing statement, and he asked us all to stop and think about how we would feel if we suddenly came to church on Sunday and the front screen of the meeting has your name on it and every sin you've ever committed. And that made me stop and think. I'd need a big screen. What? I thought you meant you needed a big screen. Oh yeah, you're so buried. Okay, where are those stones? Okay. We'll get him. Remember, he has to go home with me. He'll pay for it. Oh, no, this is on forgiveness. I forgive you, Alf. Wow, just about torpedoed my whole sermon right there. So he said, just picture up on the screen your name and all your sins on that screen. And Alf's is a really big screen. Really, really big screen. But you know what? In reality, so's yours. You know all those little hidden sins you've done? You know all those little ones you think nobody saw? God saw. And how'd you like to walk into church on Sunday and there it goes, it says, Esther Dirksen. And all of a sudden it lists all your little ones, Esther. I mean, would you want to stay? I'd turn around and leave. Pam Dyck. Oh, my Lord. You guys, it would take the whole service to get through my list. Yeah, it's the truth. I thought about all the people when R.T. Kendall shared that about the people that I've struggled with. And I thought about how much I've been forgiven. And you notice in this story, when Jesus points out to the man, so who of you is so sinless that you can condemn this woman? Even though she was blatantly caught in her sin, he still says to them, which one of you has the authority or the right to condemn her and take her life? You know, it says when he first said that he didn't say anything. And I think it's because Jesus was giving them time to be reflective. He was giving them a minute or two to think about their life, about what they'd done. The problem is sometimes we need to stop and think and remember, how much have you been forgiven? I know forgiveness is hard, and I'm going to touch on that before we end. And sometimes we wonder, why is it so hard? Well, I'm going to share that with you in a few minutes. But I thought about this woman that Jesus dared to stand with. And then I thought about the other woman Jesus dared to stand with. Remember the prostitute in Luke 7? And how he told those righteous religious men that she'd been forgiven much. And was also, the message says, so very, very grateful. For if forgiveness is minimal, the gratitude is minimal. That's from the message. Was another woman who really, what was interesting in both these stories is, so the woman that was caught in adultery, so how did these guys know where to look for her? How did they know where she was? There's a key question. So, you know what? Somebody knew where she was having sin. And why did all these religious men know where she was having sin? Did they have spies in the city? Could have been. Were they using her services? Might have been. The prostitute in Luke 7, it was the same thing. She went into a house full of these religious guys. And she was the one that anointed Jesus' feet. And remember, he says to the others, when they're horrified that he would let one so dirty as she was touch him, because they prided themselves on being so clean and so pure. And he says, people are going to remember what she's done. And then he said, you didn't even offer to wash my feet with water. And she's anointing me. She's washing my feet with her tears and drying it with the hairs of her head. And he says, because she has been forgiven much, she's so very, very grateful. But then he adds that line. And he says, for if forgiveness is minimal, then gratitude is minimal. So my question to you today is not to cause you guilt, but to cause you to think. Has your gratefulness gotten minimal? Have you forgotten what you've been forgiven? Or are you in your head thinking, well, I was raised in a Christian home, so I'm not that bad? Sin is sin. It takes the same amount of blood to forgive every sin. So whatever you did, even in a Christian home, did you lie? Did you think bad thoughts about somebody? Then you sinned too. Did you watch something that you shouldn't have? Then you sinned too. We don't have a sliding scale for sin, and yet as Christians we like to pretend we do. These are the really bad ones, and these ones are not so bad. All sin is sin. And Jesus understood that. He understood that there was no hiding this woman in front of these men. No hiding for her. She was a sinner, and she was caught. Personally, I think that when we forget what he's done for us, that's when we start picking up stones. We begin to think that somehow we've earned God's love. We've earned our forgiveness and our righteousness. I think we throw stones because we're afraid. We're afraid that others are going to find out we're sinners too, and they might stone us. Don't you think those men in the crowd had sinned? Don't you think when he gave them that moment to think, do you wonder how many of them started thinking, I wonder if somebody told him. I wonder if he knew. I wonder if he knows. I wonder if someone saw me. He gave them an opportunity to be reflective. Again, how did they know where she was? How did they catch her in the act? Somebody had to be watching and waiting, looking for her to fall. Someone had to know. At the end of her story, Jesus tells her that he doesn't condemn her. That's the end. That's the beginning of our story. Do you understand that? At the beginning of our story, the minute we said, Jesus, we accept you, we receive you into our life, right then he says to us, I don't condemn you. But he also says the same thing. Go on your way and sin no more. John 8:11 says, remember what he said before that to the men in the waiting crowd. The sinless one among you can go first and throw the stones. And he knew he was the only one that could answer that challenge. So he also knew that there was not going to be a stone being unleashed from his hand. So here's the part that we're all waiting for. What do you do with the stone in your hand? Now look at your stone and ask yourself, have I ever judged anybody? Has my name ever been on a stone with the same accusation or sin? And ask yourself if you've been forgiven of that same sin that you're holding against somebody else. Or even just ask yourself what you've been forgiven of recently that you're judging somebody else for. And ask yourself if you've heard Jesus say, go and sin no more. And if he said that to you, are you listening? Alf and I have been doing this since we were 21 years old. And we see people who are so filled with remorse, so filled with grief over the decisions in their life. And they come to Jesus, and Jesus introduces them to the Father, and there's just this amazing transaction that happens right before your eyes as they feel all the weight of all the sin come off of them. And sometimes within a day, and sometimes within months, we see them fall right back into the very thing he forgave them for. He said, go and sin no more. Now that's not condemnation if you've sinned and you've fallen, because he says, get back up and come for more grace. Come for more forgiveness. Remember, you have to be careful of the rocks we throw at people, because they can be picked up and thrown back at you. You need to think about when you look at that rock, who have I hurt? Who am I struggling? Remember, forgiveness can still mean you feel pain for a while. So don't confuse forgiveness with being pain-free. So before I finish up with what we're going to do, I want to address the subject of why is forgiveness so hard? How many of you have had to forgive somebody and it's hard? Okay, it's hard to forgive. And we're often taught or told that forgiveness is supposed to be like some magic bullet. You say the words, I forgive you, and it's all gone. Okay, the problem is when someone's punched you, you're still bruised. So forgiveness, though, is a choice. It's not an emotion. If someone owes you money, you can choose to hold the debt against them, or you can release the debt. This is where we get that phrase, to forgive our debtors. To forgive is no longer requires them to pay you back. If you cannot get over something until you can make that person say, I'm sorry, is that a true healing? Or did you force something? See, forgiveness is hard because our feelings aren't necessarily a part of the decision. So why is it when you've forgiven someone, you still feel the sting in your heart? Is it because you haven't forgiven? Why is it we still feel pain? I've forgiven, but I shouldn't feel anything against that person, right? Well, let me help you. I'm going through this myself right now. The feeling that you feel is not the feeling of unforgiveness. You have already made the choice to forgive. The feeling that you're feeling is the feeling of pain. The feeling you feel is the pain of hurt. So let me illustrate this. Let's say someone pinches you on your hand right now. Do you think that's going to hurt? If you want to try it out, sure, go do it on your neighbor. Or if you need me to pinch you, I'm happy to step in. Okay, it hurt, right? Okay, so you forgive them. But how long does the hurt last? Surely no longer than an hour. So say you've forgiven her or forgiven him, whichever one it is, and the pain is a distant memory and now you can move on with life. But let's say now someone takes a knife and they stab you in the stomach or the arm or the hand. Okay, and thank God you don't die. And you forgive them, but how long are you going to feel the pain of that wound? Probably a little longer than the pinch, right? I think so. It might be a few months. And do you think you'll have a scar after that? Do you think that scar will ever go away? Maybe. You'll be healed, but you will have a mark where you were hurt. You may have forgiven the person who hurt you, but the pain of the hurt stays with you for a while. And we get so confused on that with forgiveness. We go, I've forgiven that person, but why is it still hurts? That's normal. The hurt is the pain of what was done. So the pain you're feeling is not unforgiveness. If you've truly made a decision to forgive, you may just need some time to heal from the hurt. Don't be too hard on yourself, but don't stay in the pain. See, that's part of what Jesus also does, is he can heal the pain. Do you think that woman that was dragged out in humiliation and thrust into the middle of a bunch of men all scorning her and staring at her, you think that she wasn't traumatized by that? So even if she was able to forgive them for that moment, she probably needed some healing for the pain. Because the reality of how worthless she was thought of, that would take a while to heal. So forgiveness is a decision that can be made in a moment, but healing is a process. So if you're going through that right now, my prayer for you is that the love of God will help you through your hurts and through your pains. But how do I forgive, especially when I've been seriously hurt for someone? Well, forgiveness is not excusing that somebody has hurt you. Forgiveness cannot be genuine until the person who has been hurt, that's you, fully acknowledges the depth of the pain that has happened. I pray with people all the time, and they like to say, oh, it's no big deal. Oh, it's no big deal. But the thing is, they can't get over what happened to them. And we see that in cases of trauma all the time, because they replay the pain, replay the trauma. Forgiveness is not the same thing as not hurting. It's hard to feel like you've forgiven someone when you're still carrying the wounds from offense. And it's hard to feel like you've forgiven them when you still get angry at every thought. How many of you, at some point or time in your life, have wanted to forgive somebody, but every time you thought of them, you got angry again? How many of you are like me, where I say, no, I'm totally forgiving that person, and I decided, like, nope, that's it, I'm good, and then I see them somewhere and I go like, nope, not ready to talk to them? Okay, that's not unforgiveness. That was me being at the time ignorant of, I didn't know how to deal with the hurt. And I needed to let Jesus in to heal the hurt. See, the forgiveness was my choice. Forgiveness is your choice. Forgiveness I can do because I remember how much I've been forgiven. But the pain, only God can heal. The betrayal, only God can heal. See, I can choose to release a person from what they owe me, but I can still experience the sting of what they took from me. If you struggle to forgive someone, I tell you that there's probably a wound still there. God can heal you, but you need to release them from their debt. And one last thing that forgiveness is not, it is not the same thing as forgetting. It is not the same thing as pretending that you can suddenly trust the person who betrayed you, or that your friendship is even going to be the same. I know, isn't that sad? Now, that's not to say God can't fix it, but the reality is we have to start understanding the process of what forgiveness is and what healing is. Today upstairs we learned about healing. We did a lot of praying for each other and understood what it was to pray physical healing for everybody, but there's spiritual and emotional healing that a lot of us need to go through. So how do you do that? Well, Philippians 3:13, brothers, I do not consider that I made it on my own, but this one thing I do. Anybody know that verse? Forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead. We get to that place. Isaiah 43:25. I, even I, am he who blots out your transgressions for my sake, and I will not remember your sins anymore. That's where he's trying to get all of us. As Christians, we're called to be wise, and yes, we're called to forgive. But it's not the same thing as bringing someone who's proven that they're untrustworthy back into your confidence. Now, some of you know my story, and you know that I would never let the person who abused me babysit my children. And I would never let an alcoholic hold the key to a liquor cabinet. There are just some things that are just common sense. Do I forgive? Yes. But do I have to be smart? Yes. If you know somebody never pays you back money, then you're kind of stupid if you keep lending them money. I'm sorry to call you stupid, and I'll pray with you afterwards, but, you know, sometimes you have to be able to say, I forgive you for not repaying me, but I can't lend you money anymore. That's not unforgiveness. And what brings us to what forgiveness actually is, it's acknowledging that you've been hurt or offended, and that someone owes you something, that they're indebted to you. And justice would demand that they give you back what they owe you. But forgiveness is when you make the decision to release them from their debt. See, Jesus was in the exact perfect position to demand justice and see this woman stoned. But instead, he was teaching them a whole nother law that they hadn't understood yet. He was about to forgive her from their debt. And the cool thing is he allowed them to be a part of that. He gave them kind of a choice to be a part of that by saying, if you're not guilty, if you're sinless, throw your stone. Have at her. He gave them that opportunity. The problem was when they had to take those moments of reflection, suddenly they realized, I don't think I'm so sinless. And then we don't know. There's lots of people who have preached on this story, and they'll tell you that the other words that he was writing in the sand were all the different sins that different ones had committed. We don't know that for sure. We only know that he wrote words. But we do know that whatever happened in that moment, their conscience was convicted. And they didn't want to be a part of judging another person. Interesting, isn't it? When you decide to release somebody. Because they would have been within their right, because she broke Moses' law. Now, the weird thing in this story is that we never did hear what happened to the guy. It takes two to commit adultery, unless it worked differently in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. But we never hear what happened to the man. We never hear that he was dragged out. We never hear he was humiliated. We never hear he was beaten, whipped, scorned, or anything. They just grabbed the woman, because the law was against the woman. And again, Jesus shows the way he stood as a protector for women. Even women who were breaking the law, he gave them opportunities. Go and sin no more. I'm not condemning you. Okay, so the acts of forgiveness is setting a person free. Forgiveness is the decision not to become bitter. Hey, she could have become bitter. You know what? I bet you she knew a lot of the faces in that crowd. And I bet you to be standing there knowing that not one of them would stand up for her. That not one of them would stand up and say, hey, stop. This isn't right. She could have become really bitter. Yeah, you use me when you want me, but when I need someone to be on my side, you are willing to let them throw stones? She could have become bitter. Forgiveness can be a decision not to become bitter. Even though a person has hurt you and never acknowledged or received your offer of forgiveness, when you forgive them, you're released from bondage. You are released from the pain of the past. You can still be hurt and remember the injury, but if you forgive, you can be free. And so that's what this story to me was all about. All the different players that needed to be free. All the different players that needed to understand, you know, whether they were this self-righteous, religious, you know, governing force for the Jewish community, whether they were a part of just regular community, whether they were the woman, whether they were the man, who knows where he was, everybody had an opportunity to make a judgment in that day. And Jesus set the way for them again. If you're without sin, then cast the first stone. Now that's not saying that the person who has hurt you in your life was right. But if you throw that stone, then what you've said is, Jesus' way of handling it isn't enough. I need to hold on to my judgment to make sure they're punished. Jesus once gave me a picture of when I was being challenged to forgive one of my abusers, and I saw a picture of a jail cell. And my abuser was in the jail cell, and I was sitting on this wonderful little stool outside the jail cell. And Jesus came to me in that vision, and he said to me, you know, Pam, the jailer is in prison with the prisoner. I'll just explain that one to you again, because some of you are deep thinkers, okay? The jailer is still in prison with the prisoner. So by me sitting outside that door, making sure he suffered, guess what? I was in prison too. And then all of a sudden I looked up, and there was a hallway, and at the end of the hallway this door was opened, and I could hear all this life. I could hear children playing, I could hear laughter, I could hear people talking, and I knew what he was saying to me is, you can choose to stop watching over this one so that he suffers, and you can go find life. And so I did. So if God is speaking to you today about laying down your stones, I want you to respond in one of two ways. And B, I need the rest of my baskets back. Where did B go? So this is how it's going to work. We're going to put on a little song for you. And after you've listened to the song, I want you guys the whole time through to be asking the Lord, is there anybody's name on this stone? And you know what? One of the names might be your own. Have you forgiven yourself? And then I want you to ask his forgiveness for holding on to judgment, for holding on to anger, or holding on to bitterness. And you can come and put your stone in one of these baskets. And you can kneel right down there, or you can go back to your seat and pray. But I don't want you to go home with the stone. And then I want you to ask him to give you your heart. You know, Jesus is all about exchanges. He took our sin and gave us righteousness. He took our death and gave us life. So he can take that stone of judgment or bitterness or unforgiveness, and he can exchange it for freedom for you and a healed heart. Ask him to give you his heart. If it's a person that you need to forgive, ask him to give you his heart for who's hurt you and release them from judgment. And secondly, if there's something that you need to do now towards the person that you've been throwing stones at, ask him what it is. Maybe he just needs you to pray a blessing over them before you throw that stone in the basket. Maybe it's something you've hid in your heart about somebody, jealousy, a criticism, judgment. Then it's between you and God. Make it right before you come and throw that stone in the basket. And if it's gossip, then stop it and start blessing. Don't come into agreement with the enemy about somebody else's life. Don't go to that person like we had happen and tell them that you've gossiped all over town about them. That's great. You'll feel good, but now you will have ruined their ability to feel secure. So it's just ask God what he wants you to do if it's something like that. So can we just put that song on? So just close your eyes if you want to. I just want you to feel that stone. And I want you to ask him to show you what sin is written on it, who it's been against, or if it's against you. And when you're ready, I just want you to bring it up, and I want you to put that stone in the basket and let him wash you and renew you and pray. Can we turn the house lights out and turn that music up? Just let the words of this song wash over you. In us where we just want to, I feel like the Lord says some of you feel like I have a right to throw this stone, and he says he knows you do. What was done was not just, and it was not right. But it wasn't right and it wasn't just that Jesus had to die for your sins either. It wasn't right and it wasn't just that the only sinless one bore the weight of all our sin and took the beatings for us. So we can do this. You can do this. So Father, I pray right now, if I can have my prayer team up, we're going to do two things before we go. Those of you that need prayer for the forgiveness and just need someone to help you, if we can have a few of you over here. And then over here, the ones that some of them that took the prayer training for healing. If you need healing in your body, if you can come and stand over there.